Welcome to Bonehead. We didn't even say it right. Welcome to Bonehead. Today we have an absolute special treat for you. It's another one of the great production people out there. A storyboard artist who is...
Peter William von Sholly.
Pete von Sholly to his friends, so we call him Mr. von Sholly.
Yes.
Call him sir.
We call him sir, yes. How high shall we jump?
If you have know nothing about him, you should know something about him. He worked on Nightmare on Elm Street films, Dark Man, all budget.
The Darabont Stephen King trilogy of Shawshank, Green Mile, and The Mist.
Absolutely.
On top of that, my fascination with him starts with the fact that he created and worked with Timothy Leary on a Timothy Leary-based comic book.
On top of all the other interesting people that he has known and met, one being Bernie Wrightson.
Yeah, and also he had Charlie Band.
So this man has covered tons of forms of entertainment, animation, live action, comic books. He's still bringing books out, so stay involved.
From G.I. Joe to the real Ghostbusters. Here's our interview. Hey, my name's Joe Lewis. You'll need to...
And I'm Chad.
James.
And we're going to introduce...
Peter William von Sholly. Am I saying your last name correct?
Yeah, von Sholly. It's pronounced the way it looks.
Okay, yeah. I actually threw my finger to Chad to make sure that because I did not want to butcher it, and I actually forgot to ask him right before we started how to say your last name, so I didn't want to be, you don't want to be rude, right? All right. Well, let's go ahead and get started. How did you get started? Where did you grow up, and then how did you end up in the movie business?
My father I was born in New York City, and we moved immediately a lot of places. My dad was in the Army, so we lived all over the place. And the thing that we lived in Japan and Hawaii and Maryland and Virginia. All, 2 years here, 2 years there. But the thing that was the continuity was with comic books.
Yeah.
I was always reading comic books, so they had comic books in Japan and Hawaii, wherever you were. The Army post is kind of the same everywhere. So we could get comic books and monster magazines. So that was the constant thread, and I always wanted to make comic books.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have a particular favorite comic?
Beat me to it.
Well, I liked Turok, Son of Stone, which was an old Dell comic that had American Indians and dinosaurs.
Yeah, James just perked up when you said that. So.
Yeah.
They've made video games of it and all that. You've probably seen, but there wasn't a lot of dinosaur stuff in those days. So whatever you could get was really special.
Yeah. What was your favorite?
I don't know what it's like growing. Huh?
No, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I just gonna say I don't know what it's like now when so much is at everybody's fingertips.
Yeah.
But obviously it wasn't like that back then. So.
Right.
An issue of Famous Monsters was like a gold mine. And there were a couple of cartoonists that I really loved, like Carl Barks and John Stanley.
Oh, wow.
And I didn't know who they were because they never had their names on their comics.
Right.
But I knew they were good, and I knew that John Stanley wrote and drew Little Lulu comics for like 20-some years, which were just great comic books. It wasn't like a little girl's comic. It was like a kid's comic. It was wonderful. But he never had his name on it. And Carl Barks, he did Uncle Scrooge and Donald Duck, and it was about Walt Disney's Uncle Scrooge, Donald Duck, so nobody knew who Carl Barks was. But his stuff was superior. And so I got a lot of inspiration from these. And Jack Kirby, I would see Jack Kirby's art in odd places like Challengers of the Unknown. He did Green Arrow for DC and stuff.
Yeah. Right.
And, before Marvel, and so there was a handful of people that were very inspiring that I really liked and made me want to draw. And I used to want to be Stanley and Jack Kirby, right, and draw comics, And when I don't want to bog you down with too too much.
No, this is fascinating. We're loving it. Keep going, because and the problem is you can't see our faces, but we're actually doing all those nonverbal cues of agreeing with you.
Yeah.
The three of us, what makes us great, or what makes us interesting, despite other people, is that we all have different interests, and
Yeah.
James and Chad are very much the comic book people, and they're sitting here doing this.
Like, for example, I own a collection of Jack Kirby's run on Green Arrow. So, yeah, I love it. So,
and James was very familiar with the which one was it earlier?
Turok, Son of Stone.
Yeah, right. So we're all have different interests, and that's the reason we were all sitting here doing this. We're following you, and it's fascinating.
That's good. It's good to know who I'm talking to.
Yes,
yeah.
that you know what I'm talking about.
Right,
Yes, sir.
And I was sitting here trying to figure out how in the hell you got a copy of Uncle Forey, Famous Monsters in Japan. That had to be impossible. Did they even have it in Japan?
Yeah, because Army Posts had the postage exchange or the PX.
The PX, right? Yeah.
You know, and at the PX they'd have comic books and magazines. Now, I had an older brother. I was born in 1950. I forget when Famous Monsters came out. It might have been 55 or 4 or somewhere like that.
I actually don't know the exact date either. Yeah.
Yeah, but it was early 50s. I was too little to have really known about it, but I had a brother about 5 years older, and he was buying those things. And so I would get Famous Monsters, you know, his copies, because eventually he turned into a normal person and got lost interest in all that stuff.
And you did not.
I never did. So I got all his monster magazines, and you know, he used to listen to rock and roll music, so I would hear, Little Richard and Chuck Berry and Screamin' Jay Hawkins,
right?
The great musicians, and I was thoroughly. Bo Diddley and everybody. Bo Diddley was my brother's hero, and he actually got to know a lot of those people.
Oh, really?
So, yeah, he was friends with Chubby Checker, for instance, for like many years. He still is, actually.
Wow.
Oh.
So, yeah, so I had my brothers. He was the perfect age to be listening to rock and roll and reading comic books and Mad Magazine, EC Comics and stuff.
Right.
I was a little bit young, but because of him, I was able to get exposed to that stuff, whereas without him, I might not. So that was real important.
Yeah.
You know, and then so my dad retired from the Army. We lived in upstate New York in Columbia County, which is kind of near Albany. Albany is like maybe half an hour to an hour drive. So you would go to Albany to screw around and go to used bookstores and stuff like that.
Right.
Then I went to college in Syracuse. I was going to go to Providence to Rhode Island School of Design, where I was accepted, but I had a scholarship in New York that I could only use in New York, so I went to Syracuse University, where it was cold. It was, early 70s, so we were very busy experimenting with entertainment.
Experimenting? You mean like you were going out late listening to rock and roll music and drinking that sugar water? Or you weren't smoking the marijuana, were you? Doing the acid?
Oh, heavens, no.
Sorry, keep going.
I mean, I only used drugs once for about 17 years.
Oh, it reminds me of a line from Caddyshack. Do you do drugs, Danny? Every day. Good.
There you go. Well, that's what we did, That's
right.
what was done. And I saw underground comics during those years, which were like shocking, actually. If you
like Crumb?
You love Crumb and Zap, but the Crumb stuff was more entertaining and fun. But there was S. Clay Wilson and people like that were in there with those stuff which was way over the top, gross and violent. It was kind of shocking to see that in comic books. And Wonder Warthog, Gilbert Shelton did the Freak Brothers and all those.
Yeah.
I had seen him in Help magazine. Harvey Kurtzman did Help magazine, and we used to read that. You guys ever see that?
I'm familiar with it. Only reason I'm familiar with it is because of Terry Gilliam.
Oh yeah.
Am I right that before he became famous for Python, I think he worked for Help magazine, or that was his dream?
Yes, he did.
Am I correct about that?
He did, and you know what fumetti is?
I'm slightly, but explain it a little bit more. By the way, you should have been impressed that we were able to pull that one out, but I'm just joking.
Well, fumetti is using comic books that use photographs.
Right.
Oh.
National Lampoon used to.
Right.
That was fumetti, and Terry Gilliam did some fumetti stuff for Help magazine, one of which starred John Cleese.
Oh yeah.
It's a really twisted, funny story about a man that has designs on a Barbie doll.
Oh my God! I gotta go track that down on eBay.
Yeah, I'm sure it's it's floating around. But anyway, I knew Gilbert Shelton and Robert Crumb were in Help magazine, both of them.
Right.
Before the Undergrounds, and so when I saw the Undergrounds, it was kind of like, oh my God, normal people, anybody can do comics. You don't have to work for DC or Marvel. There's other ways to do comics. So that was such a, you know what I mean? You don't have to have their approval.
Yes.
You just have to have the willingness to sit down there and do the work.
Yes.
But it opened up, these possibilities. And I met a friend in Syracuse. It's funny how certain little events change your whole life.
Mm-hmm.
And I was driving. Syracuse was the only town in the whole world that didn't have any comic books. I don't know why. I could not find a goddamn comic book in Syracuse to save my life. And I know that sounds insane, but there was no place. So there was a town, Utica, that was about an hour away.
Yeah.
And they had one of those good old cigar stores they used to have. They called them cigar stores, but they were kind of like 7-Elevens or something. They had books and magazines and cigars.
Absolutely.
And whatever else, Yeah, so there was comic books there. So I was driving one day to buy some Jack Kirby comics, like Commandy and New Gods and stuff like that. And we were stoned, and we're driving, me and a friend from the college. We smoked some marijuana, and we were driving to the comic book store, and we're going down the thruway, and there's a guy hitchhiking. And this is the really weird thing, because I was not going to pick the guy up, not because I was unfriendly or anything, but we had a Dodge truck that had one of those cab over engine things, so right next to you as the driver is this big hump where the engine is.
I know exactly what you're talking about, by the way. My dad was a mechanic, and there was a guy who had one in the 80s who brought it in all the time. I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's not, so if you have more than two people, somebody has to sit on the hump in the middle, because that's it, So I don't know why, but I'm not going to pick the guy up. And the guy who I was riding with said, why don't you give that guy a ride? And I went, okay. So I pulled over and he got in. Now, only because this guy said, why don't you give that guy a ride, did I pull over. And this guy got in, and he introduced himself. His name was Warren Greenwood, and he was a cartoonist. And I said, oh, really? I like cartoons and comics and stuff. And he said, well, where do you live? And I gave my address in Syracuse at the college. Then I dropped him off at his destination, got comic books, went home, forgot all about it. The next day, there's a knock at the door, and there's Warren Greenwood. And he brought his stuff, his comics with him. And he showed me his cartoons and his drawings, and I showed him my artwork. And he said, I like your artwork. Let's work together. Let's want to do comic books. And I was like, oh, sure, because Warren was a writer.
Yeah.
And at that time, I thought, I don't know what to write. So the fact that, here was a writer, so he could do that part, and I could draw. So, we started to do comics together. And then Vaughn Bodie, you guys know Vaughn Bodie, Cheech Wizard and all that?
No, you lost me on that one. We kept up with you for a while, and then you lost us on that one. Sorry.
Well, Vaughn Bodie did a comic strip called Cheech Wizard. It was a funny-looking little lizard man. And it was an underground comic, and he was in the National Lampoon, and Vaughn Bodie was. He also made this movie, Wizards.
I am familiar with Wizards. I have seen Wizards.
Yes.
That isn't Wizards directed by Ralph Bakshi, right?
Yeah.
Fritz the Cat, right?
Wizards.
Fritz the Cat, same guy, right? I was Ralph Bakshi. Sorry, okay.
Yeah, which he stole from Robert Crumb. And,
right.
You know.
Yeah.
Anyway, Bakshi was going to make a movie called War Wizards with Vaughn Bodie, and it was based on Cheech Wizard.
Mm-hmm.
And now Vaughn Bodie died a year later or so, and so they just went ahead and made it into Wizards.
Right.
So the movie that got made, there was a lawsuit about it and all kinds of stuff. Bakshi was, you get mixed reviews about him from a lot of people. But
well, I've actually never.
Anyway, Vaughn Bodie.
Go ahead.
He had gone to Syracuse.
Uh-huh.
And that's where I was in school. So he came from Hollywood to talk to the illustration class. And me and Warren met him, and he talked about working for the National Lampoon and working in movies and underground comics and all that stuff. And he said, if you guys ever come to L.A., you know, make sure and look me up. I'll introduce you to some people. So Warren, the guy that I picked up hitchhiking that I wasn't going to pick up, he moved to Hollywood, and he met Vaughn Bodie, and Vaughn introduced him to George DiCaprio, who was Leonardo's father.
Oh.
Leonardo was like a baby.
Yeah.
He was like a little 2 years old or something then. And George DiCaprio worked with, he distributed underground comics in Hollywood and Los Angeles. And so he became friends with Warren. So I'm sitting there in upstate New York looking at, some trees and stuff. And
freezing to death.
And writing me letters about how he'd gone up to San Francisco and he met Ron Turner at Last Gasp and went to the Rip-Off Press and met Gilbert Shelton and met Robert Crumb, and George DiCaprio had introduced him to all these people, and I'm sitting there thinking, shit, me too, I'm missing out. And so I moved to California, and me and Warren shared a place for a while, and then I got my own place. And while I was here, I discovered animation, because Warren had started to working at animation at Hanna-Barbera, doing Super Friends and stuff like that. He was doing in-betweens and storyboards. And I had never really heard of storyboards, but I saw them, and I went, this looks like comics, kind of,
Right.
And I thought, well, maybe I could learn how to do this. And because, it's hard to make a living as an artist. There's not a lot of fields, at least there wasn't then, where just a cartoonist, artist type of person could actually make a good living.
Right.
And suddenly I was, animation. And I was in the right place where Filmation and Ruby Spears and Hanna-Barbera and, Patty Freeling, there was all these studios that were doing cartoons. And the cartoons were all being done here. They hadn't started farming the work out to overseas yet.
Yeah.
So there was lots of work. And so I helped Warren with his freelance work, and then I got a job at Marvel Productions and started to meet people and learn about animation. Larry Houston was one of the people. Larry he was one of the X-Men producers. He's kind of another old fart that people are interested in now because he, did this stuff. And Larry taught me about storyboarding, about film. And that's the thing about storyboarding is film is not the same as print. You have screen direction, and there's certain rules, not a lot, but there are certain rules that apply to film.
Right.
That are unique to film. And so Larry helped me with that, and Art Vitello was a producer of a lot of shows like Gummy Bears and Tiny Toons and stuff like that. He did those later, but Art was a friend, and he also had a lot of experience. And the two of those guys kind of explained to me the ropes about storyboarding. But I was getting excited about movies. George DiCaprio had introduced me to Bill Stout and
William Stout. Yeah.
Can I ask you something about? Can I ask you something about the DiCaprio family? Please tell me Leonardo DiCaprio was one ugly ass baby.
No, he was cute.
Damn it!
Very cute. And you know what else? He was just the nicest kid.
Oh,
hell.
When my son was a little kid, like 3 years old or something, Leonardo was so nice to him. And kids Leonardo's age, I guess Leonardo was just getting his first work on like Growing Pains and shows like that.
Yeah.
And kids that age generally didn't really have any time or patience for little kids.
Yeah.
But Leonardo wasn't like that. He was so nice to my son and stuff. So he was really And George helped me so much. George got me the job doing the Timothy Leary comic.
Oh.
Yeah.
And George helped so many people. I'm so happy for them, because if anybody in the world deserves success, George and Leonardo and all of them do. And it's like just fantastic to see what's happened to them.
Well, damn it, that's not a good story about. That's a wonderful story. That's not a good story about dirt and about treason and about backstabbing. We're joking with you. We're joking with you. No, Williams. I have met William Stout. Although I'm not friendly enough with him to call him Bill Stout. He signed my I met him at a. Oddly enough, he goes to a model convention quite often in Louisville, Kentucky, and he.
What is it?
Wizard Con.
No, it's not Wizard Con.
No,
WonderCon.
Wonderfest. Oh, have you been there?
Wonderfest, yeah.
Have you been there?
No, I haven't. I used to go to the mad model parties and stuff that they had in L.A. I go to Monster Palooza now that they have here.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
And I usually see Stout and a lot of other people at these shows.
Yeah. So Stout, he was very friendly and he was very outgoing. He was signing for free, which I always appreciate. But yeah. But anyway, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to get off on a tangent there.
No, it's all right. It all sort of overlaps. That's why, I'm finding myself talking about animation and, there's all these threads going on at the same time. So the chronology sometimes gets away from me, when I'm trying to say this happened and then that happened, because,
well,
wait a minute.
Well,
this happened.
Well, it makes complete sense, because that's how life happens. You make connections, and those connections make connections, and that's where your career comes in. And that doesn't necessarily have to be Hollywood. That's any person's life, right? That's how you get a job often.
That's right. And when, things, it seems like, and something just came out of nowhere. It doesn't come out of nowhere. It comes because you did something.
Yes.
And, you laid the groundwork for this thing and that thing, and maybe you forgot all about it, and it seems like stuff comes out of nowhere, but you're right, it doesn't.
It doesn't. No, it's just where luck is just where preparation and opportunity, hard work and opportunity meet, to me. That's what luck is. Does that make sense? It's like there's an opportunity, and I did a lot of hard work, and I got that opportunity, and that's what luck is. Yeah.
Well, I picked up this hitchhiker, and he ended up working together, and he moved out here, and I moved out here because he moved out here.
Right.
If I hadn't picked him up that day, I don't know if I'd ever have come to California.
Right.
And if I hadn't come to California, I wouldn't have gotten to work in movies or animation or any of that stuff. So,
what do you think you would have done? Do you think you would have ended up in New York City? Do you think you would have ended up working in advertising, or what? What do you think you would have done?
I don't know. I wasn't. I have no idea. I know I wasn't good enough to draw comics then. And if I went to Marvel or DC, or they were the two main places you could go, I just didn't have the skills, and I wouldn't have been able to get a job for them. We went to see Neil Adams in New York to his studio.
Mm-hmm. Oh wow!
And me and Warren Greenwood, the guy I told you about.
Mm-hmm.
We went to the National Lampoon, and we showed him our comics, and we did not get work. And we went to Neil Adams, and Neil Adams looked at my stuff, and he was very critical. And I was sort of disappointed because, you want people to tell you you're great.
Right.
And they're not doing you a favor by telling you you're great.
No.
If you stink.
Yes.
And so it's more honest, And if you go to somebody and you say, here's my work, what do you think? Well, you're asking for it. And if they don't like it and they tell you what's wrong with it, you really can't complain about that. I've talked to Neil Adams. If you start talking, he'll talk your ear off, which, that's okay. But he was very nice to us, and he let us come to his studio, and he showed us how he worked. And he would do lay out his comic book pages on like a thumbnail, and then he would use one of those overhead projector things to blow up the page, to blow up the thumbnail, and then draw it on the real paper. And he was showing it, his technique and everything. And the thing was, he was critical of our work, but he was telling the truth.
Yes.
It was okay.
Absolutely.
Anyway, and so when I got out here, I met we went to San Diego to the Comic-Con. I guess it was 1976. And
when it was not a big deal, right?
No, it was at this hotel called the El Cortez.
Yeah.
And everybody loved it. And there was a pool, like a public area with a pool, and Jack Kirby and Neil Adams and all these people would just be hanging out there, and fans could come up and talk to them, and you could show your work to publishers. It's so much fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was all about comics, and it wasn't anything about movies, and it wasn't, this monstrosity that it's turned into.
Right.
That was years to come. So that was really, really fun, and I was lucky to meet George DiCaprio and get introduced to all these people, because I don't know how it came about, the Timothy Leary comic, but George had met Timothy Leary, and he wanted to do, somebody came up with the idea, why don't we adapt your latest book into comic book form? And for some reason or other, I got suggested, so I got the job. And we met with Leary a few times, and he was very funny, very, very funny guy, high as a kite. Really nice. But really nice, So
right.
we had fun, and just one of those things that you do, And George introduced me to a guy who ran a head shop on Hollywood Boulevard, and he said he was a psychic. And he was looking for somebody to do past life portraits of people. And George introduced me. He said, well, my friend Pete is an artist, and, he needs work. And so we introduced us. So this guy invited me to these psychic fairs. And a psychic fair is kind of like a flea market-y kind of thing, where they have palm readers and crystal ball readers and tarot card readers.
Yeah, believe it or not, there is one here every month. There is a.
Oh, well, there you go.
There is a huge. There's a horror movie convention that happens here, and it's called Scarefest. But I mean, 40 or 30% of that convention is those people, and they have a mystical fair every month, and there are a ton of them around here. So yes, we are familiar. Keep going.
Yeah. Well, people love that kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
There was a woman named Tamara Rand, and Tamara Rand was a blonde, beauty type of woman, and she was like the big hotshot psychic, and she had the Rand Hypnosis Institute down on La Cienega, which is a very West LA kind of a high, toward Beverly Hills, sort of a high-end part of town,
Right.
And this guy knew her, and she would give us an office at these psychic fairs. So I didn't say anything. My job was just to sit there, and the guy would sit you down, and he would say, he had this real, I can't do his voice, but he had this real deep, sonorous voice, and he'd be go, okay, I want you to sit down and relax, and think about some place that you're very comfortable, and you may be in a boat going down a river, and blah, blah, blah. I'm just sitting there, and he's telling these people, and then, he'll say, like, do you ever get headaches? They like, well, yeah, sometimes, yeah. And you were killed by a tomahawk in your last life, and you were a pioneersman, and you lived in Kentucky, and you were very tall, and you had blue eyes and a big scar down your cheek. And now, while he's starting to describe, I'm starting to draw a picture, because like the police description,
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm just making shit up. Whatever he says, I'm just trying to draw a picture. And then they charge him $100 or something, and I got half. And he would tell them a big story about who they were and how they died and about themselves, and people just loved it. They ate it up. They were.
It's amazing how nobody has a boring past life.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. And the thing is, too, the guy was very hip to how to handle people psychologically. Sometimes people would ask him a question, and he wouldn't answer. And he'd sit quietly, and he'd think, and then he'd sort of say something, unrelated to the question.
Yeah.
And I asked him later once, in between times, I said, what about this? When people ask you a question, he said, Pete, if I don't answer it, they forget they asked.
That's a good one.
Yeah, so I was like, okay, to rich people's houses. They would have a party, you know, and he would be a psychic, and all the old ladies would fawn over him, and you know, he would, you know, and I would draw pictures of the people sometimes like the way they look sitting there in front of me, the way they really look on one side of the page, and the other side would be, you know, them as the Egyptian prince or whoever they were, you know. And I did that for a little while, but I honestly just thought it was bullshit, and I didn't like it. And I thought, you know, I can't do this. I'm going to these places, and this is just ridiculous. Now, I don't, you know, maybe the guy was a psychic. What do I know? I just did what I did, but I didn't like it. And I finally told him, I said, I just can't do this.
Is it? It's funny. You can make money. You felt bad about making money on that because you thought it was bullshit. But doing a movie or something else, which is also bullshit, you're fine with. And do you think it's because everybody knows it's bullshit from the time I'm going in, I'm working on Child's Play 2, and everybody knows that's bullshit as they're walking in? Is that, you think that's the difference? Because it is to me. We've talked about that before. Like
it's a job.
Yeah.
That's a real job, and you're doing what you're asked to do.
Right.
But yeah, I guess
because they're both
a little more straightforward. We all know what we're doing.
Right.
You know, I've got a friend. Funny, is a guy, Mike Muscal. He was the I forget what he was on Reanimator, but he was an important person on Reanimator and some of the Brian Usna movies. And Mike would say, you know, in the movies, when everybody's working on a movie, we're all working on. We all know it's a piece of shit. Nobody says anything, because if you say, you know, this is a piece of shit, we should make this better. This isn't going to work. You know, if you do that, then you're a naysayer, and they don't want to hear it.
Right.
And so nobody says anything, and everybody just keeps their mouth shut. And it's like, because you'll get fired, or even if you don't get fired, if the movie comes out and it is a piece of shit, and everybody goes, oh my God, that's a piece of shit, they don't say, you know, Pete told us it was a piece of shit. We should listen to him. Let's promote him. Let's hire him again. They blame you. You know, that's what Mike taught me. You know, they blame you, and that's why so many bad things get done, because nobody will open their mouth. And I think personally that the more successful people get, like Spielberg, for instance, the less people around them are going to call them. Maybe they have an idea that's not such a great idea. George Lucas.
Yeah, I was about to say George Lucas. Right, George Lucas is is a great example of that. Yeah.
He's surrounded by people. Oh, great idea, George. I'm sure he is. You know, and so you know, people don't have a real honest sounding board.
Yeah.
But the psychic thing, this is one of the weird past life portraits. This is one bizarre jobs I've had. You know.
Right.
So there was a whole bunch of that, and then, but I wanted to work in live action movies, and
right.
I didn't want to work in animation. I wanted to work in real movies, and there was a guy named Kevin Altieri, and Kevin became one of the Batman producers for Warner Brothers, one of the big people, along with Bruce Timm and some others that did the Batman successful shows, you know.
Right.
And Kevin had been doing storyboards for movies, and I had met him. And he said, I want to work in animation. Can you introduce me to anybody in animation? And he said, I don't want to join the union. I'm not sure why he didn't want to join the union, but he didn't. And I said, well, there's a place called DIC. It's a new place. Yeah. And they're non-union. And they're hiring. And, you know, you might try that. So he went over there, and he got hired, and he did very well, and he started a whole career in animation. Meanwhile, Canon Films called him, and he said, well, I can't do it, and he gave them my information. So I got my first job in a live-action movie, and I was so excited, you know, because, wow, this is the movies. Even if it was a shitty movie, which it was. I think it was called...
I was about to say, which one was it? Because I don't remember seeing... We don't remember seeing a Canon film on your filmography, because we're familiar with...
No, you wouldn't. It was something about like a teen comedy, 4 stupid guys go to Mexico and work in a hotel or something.
I don't know.
Chili's or something like that. I think it was called.
There were so many Canon films, and Menachem, and I mean, they just made so many movies over that time period.
Yeah.
Right.
That's right. And so this was just, and this guy named William Sachs was the director. Now he directed something called Galaxina and other stuff. And so he did this comedy thing, but it was my first live action movie. So there was a scene that I was supposed to storyboard, and it was two people in a car driving down the road talking. So I'm drawing, like a front-on view of the two of them, where like a two-shot, then raking a shot raking over the driver onto the passenger, and then a reverse where you're over the passenger onto the driver, and a shot from the back seat where you're looking over the two of their heads and you see the road up ahead. And I was drawing all these angles, and I brought the storyboards in, and Bill Sachs said, well, where am I going to put the camera? And I said, well, this and that. And he goes, no, you don't understand. I'll be lucky to get two cameras to cover this shot.
Right.
And it was my first brush with reality. Oh, live action films deal with actual cameras in actual places. In animation, it's all drawing, so you can put the camera anywhere you want.
Wherever you want, right. Yeah.
And that was the big difference. Like, well, that was another little wake-up call. That's like, this is different, And then Bill did some other stuff that I storyboarded, a couple movies. One was called, Thunder Women. It was going to be just as ridiculous as it sounded. It was a tribe of post-apocalyptic warrior women who used men as slaves and stuff like that.
This sounds fantastic. It sounds fantastic.
Good, right?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. So anyway, that was shot in Israel.
Yeah.
And I got Lane Lisker. Lane Lisker was a monster maker guy and a makeup guy. Lane Lisker was in the Cantina sequence in Star Wars. He was like the big guy, the fuzzy guy in the white fuzzy suit.
Yeah.
And Lane was a wonderful guy, great artist, and he animated the Pillsbury Doughboy and stuff like that.
Oh, wow.
I mean, Lane did a lot of things. But I got him a job on this movie, and he had to make a monster suit for a man that he never would get to meet, because they weren't going to bring him to Israel, and they weren't going to bring the actor over here, so he had to sculpt and create a suit, and he'd have to get measurements, like, well, how big are his feet? How tall is he? What's his waist? What's this and that? And they would send information, and Lane had to build a suit and send it to Israel, and then they just had to cram it onto the guy best they could. It was just, one of these wacky, low-budget things. And then the movie ended up being called America 3000. I don't know why, but they changed the title to America 3000. So but it was a monster movie. It was a science fiction movie. And I didn't care if it was ridiculous,
Right.
A guy named David Engelbach, he wrote a movie called Over the Top, which was a Stallone movie about arm wrestling.
Yeah.
That was David's claim to fame. And that movie did really well. So his reward was he was going to get to direct his own movie, Thunder Women.
Yeah.
And they made the movie, and it was called America 3000. It was so bad. Do you ever have a situation where you're dying to laugh, but you can't?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
So we went to a screening of Thunder Women, and I brought my wife and Andrea and a friend of mine, an artist friend of mine, along for the ride. So we were in a screening room, and we're watching this horrible movie. And there wasn't a lot of people there. There was maybe a dozen people in total in the theater.
Yeah.
So the movie ended, and the lights came on, and nobody knew what to say. The director was there, the producers were there, and it was the most awkward silence you can imagine, because there was nowhere to hide. There was hardly anybody there,
Right.
So finally, some genius came up with the greatest statement. He said, "Thank you, David." Everybody went, "Yeah, thank you, David." Say that. And then we had to go down with all of them on an elevator. And we're down there on the elevator, and me and my friend and my wife were all absolutely inside. We're dying. We're just dying. But you can't let on.
Right.
And so there was this horrible, long, eternal elevator ride. And when we got to the bottom, we got out, we got in the car. As soon as we got in the car and shut the windows, we just exploded.
Yeah.
I never laughed so hard. It's one of the hardest laughs ever because it was held in for so long.
Yeah.
But it was, by God, it was a movie,
Yeah.
And, so it was a start.
Yeah.
And Kevin we had sort of alternated careers, me and Kevin Altieri, because he did really well in animation, and I started working in movies.
Mm-hmm.
But that's another one of those things, you know, it just one
happened.
Little connection, and then you get your toe in the door, you know. Vamp, you guys know about Vamp?
Oh, yes.
We're familiar with Vamp.
Yes,
absolutely.
Sir.
Yeah, that was the first real monster movie that I did, and that was so cool because, you know, I used to go to the effects shop, Greg Canham, did the effects for that, and, you know, I would go, because nobody minded, you know, I would go to his shop and watch him making the prosthetic pieces and things like that.
Right.
And, you know, I was really interested in that stuff. I used to read Fangoria and Cine Fantastique and Famous Monsters and everything. And so how the special effects were done was a fascination of mine. And so to get to actually go there and watch, you know, in your storyboarding, they did transformations in Vamp. Well, they didn't have American Werewolf in London and The Howling, and
right.
that it wasn't to that level, you know. But there were things where teeth, you know, big close-up, teeth grow, big close-up, eyeballs change color, things
right.
like that.
Yeah.
And we would storyboard all these little cuts, you know. And Vamp, I guess they liked what I did. There was a woman there named Lisa Hollingshead, and I don't remember what her job was on the movie, but I remember her because she recommended me. She went to New Line after Vamp, and she recommended me to them, and that's when I did Nightmare on Elm Street 3.
Yeah.
And that's when I met Frank Darabont, because he and Chuck Russell were writing partners.
Right.
Yeah.
In those days. Yeah, so, and I got to know them, and Chuck was more of I don't know how to explain it, more like not a grown-up, because that's not the word, but Frank Darabont and I were into models, monster models, and things like that.
Right.
And, you know, we used to go to the kit shows together and get Billiken model kits and everything. We were all from Japan, and so we kind of bonded over that. But Chuck, it was more, you know, professional. I mean, not that he was unfriendly or anything, but I became more friends with Frank than with him.
Yeah.
Well, you did. You've done a lot of movies. I don't mean to interrupt you, but you've done a lot of movies with Frank. A lot.
Yeah. Well, that's when I met Frank.
Yeah.
And we became friends.
Uh-huh.
And so when he started to do movies, the first one that he did that I worked on was, I think, called Dead and Buried.
Yep.
It was a cable movie.
Yeah, for television.
And yeah. And so I did boards for that, and then Shawshank Redemption, and then The Green Mile, and then The Mist.
Yeah.
And so the thing is, when you're working with these guys, if you have a director that you hit it off with and they like what you do, chances are they'll hire you on their next movie. But it can be years in between movies.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, so you need a lot of those guys.
Mm-hmm.
Especially with Darabont, because it's so. Every movie he makes is art and wonderful and amazing, but they're so far apart. I mean, we're still waiting for a new one.
Yeah.
Still waiting for what?
We're still waiting for a new one.
For another Darabont film. We haven't had one since The Mist. I mean, he was doing The Walking Dead for a while, and then he did the Mob City show.
Yeah.
But we're still waiting on that new Frank Darabont film.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you know, Frank had a lot of. I don't want to speak for Frank, but I know he had. You know, he wrote an Indiana Jones movie.
Yes.
Yeah.
He did a lot of things, you know, that didn't get made, and so I don't know how bitter he is about all that, but you know, he didn't get to do all the things he wanted to do. He wrote a couple sequels to The Thing that we were going to storyboard.
Oh, really?
Going to make. Yeah.
So
I think there might have been 2 movies that were follow-ups to The Thing.
Well, let's talk about that for a second, because I'm a huge John Carpenter fan, and we've met him a couple of times, and I would like to know, was John involved, or was it just Frank was going to do a sequel to The Thing?
I don't know. I never heard of Carpenter's
right
being in. I never heard of him in connection with it. And they got the scripts, and they were going to do the movies.
Oh, really?
Then they didn't happen. And,
yeah.
You know, he wrote a Frankenstein movie, and he said, he called me up and he said, do you know anybody who knows Bernie Wrightson? And I said, I know Bernie Wrightson. And he was, you do? And I said, yeah. And so I introduced him to Bernie, and became, because he was a Bernie Wrightson fan.
Yes, we are too.
Now, question: did you meet Bernie through doing the Swamp Thing animated series, or was this before that?
Well, no, because Bernie lived in Rhinebeck, New York at that time.
Yeah.
And James Gurney lived there too, the Dinotopia guy.
Oh yeah.
And they had that was kind of the part of the country where my family, my parents lived.
Right.
And I would go back and visit. And on one of the return visits, I actually worked for Doug Trumbull. Doug Trumbull had a studio in Massachusetts, which was close by. And it was a thing for Las Vegas.
Silent Running, Doug Trumbull, right?
Yeah.
Silent Running.
Luxor,
yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I just wanted to make sure I knew who you were talking about. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, Luxor was one of those ride films.
Uh-huh.
Like Back to the Future, or, where you're in a car and the car is bouncing around.
Absolutely.
You're not actually traveling, but you're looking at a movie that's traveling.
Right, absolutely.
You feel like, yeah. So anyway, while I was back there, I had met Jim Gurney from Dinotopia because I was a dinosaur fan. And he invited me to this, they called it First Tuesday or First Thursday or something, a once-a-month get-together. And it would be Jeff Jones and Mike Kaluta and Bernie Wrightson and Jim Gurney and Steve Hickman and other people. I got to go to a couple of those because I happened to be back east visiting or working, which was unusual because I lived here then. But I got to meet Bernie through that, and then I took them over to the Jonas Studios. That was where they made the dinosaurs for the World's Fair. Sinclair made these life-size dinosaurs.
Yes,
oh, yeah.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
And Jonas Studios was my friend's, that was their grandpa, the great sculptor Louis Paul Jonas, that did all that stuff. So I took him over to the studio because everybody was interested in dinosaurs. So me and Bernie and Gurney went over there, as I used to call him. And, so I had just got to know him. Now, we weren't real close friends or anything, but I knew him. And he worked on a movie at New Line called My Demon Lover.
Yeah.
And I got hired to work on My Demon Lover, and then they called me into a meeting and they said, forget that, we want you to do Nightmare on Elm Street 3, not My Demon Lover, so we're switching you over to another movie.
No offense, but out of those two, you're going to sign a hell of a lot more autographs for Nightmare on Elm Street 3 than you are My Demon Lover. Because I bet, James, you've never even seen it, have you?
No, I must
Only
admit.
two, and we are nerds and geeks, and only two of us have actually seen My Demon Lover, so keep going.
I will say I enjoyed it.
I actually enjoyed it, but yeah. Sorry about that.
And see, now New Line Cinema was not the monstrous corporate thing that it is.
Right.
It was a small studio.
Uh-huh.
And Bob Shea, who ran the studio, you would see him going out of the offices. You could talk to him, and Sarah Risher, the people who ran it, and Rachel Talalay, Rupert Harvey, all these people were around. And I went to Rachel with Prehysteria. I said, boy, have I got a movie for you.
Uh-huh.
And she said, what is it? Come on in, because you could do that.
Yeah.
And I showed her the Prehysteria storyboards and sketches and things. She said, this is great. We want to do this. And we entered into a long, protracted period where they optioned it, and I was going to get a big producer fee and all kinds of stuff. And they were talking to the Kyoto brothers and other people about David Allen and other people about, doing the stop-motion dinosaur work. And but ultimately, they passed on it.
Yeah.
And I was told, and I don't know you never know what's true, but I was told that Bob Shea just didn't want, it was a kids movie, and he just didn't want to make kids movies. So even though they paid us a lot of money to write a script, and we wrote a script, and I was all excited that we were going to do this movie with stop-motion dinosaurs and stuff, and so it didn't happen. So I ended up with that scumbag crook thief. Oh, did I say that? I ended up with Charlie Van.
Well, hold on. Now, that leads us to, and I don't mean to stop you there. One thing I want our audience to know, because they're probably not as knowledgeable about this as the four of us, including you. Kyoto Brothers did the Killer Clowns from Outer Space. They did the Krites from Critters. They're really famous for all these things. I just want our audience to know that, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely.
And-
Terrific.
And
Charlie Band.
Charlie Band.
You know, in Pee-wee's Big Adventure,
Right.
they did Large Marge.
Right. And they're famous for this.
And,
But what's funny is if you could look at my notes here,
As well as mine.
as well as Chad's, we actually have tell us a Charlie Band story. and I promise, because we have only ever met one person who didn't have something negative to say about him. And who was that?
It was Peter David.
Do you know Peter David, the writer?
yeah.
And he said that he basically demanded all his money up front, and that's the only. And he even said himself that, to his knowledge, he's the only one that Charlie Bandit owed money to.
Absolutely. Peter David told James and I in where was it? I don't remember. Wisconsin. He said, "Yes, gentlemen, Charlie, I'm the only person you'll ever meet in Hollywood who Charlie Band doesn't owe money to." It was just funny the way he said it, and. So we have in our notes, tell us a really good Charlie Band story.
Well, you know, and you still only know one person that didn't get ripped off by Charlie Band.
Right. So what was that like? Tell us, just go ahead and go off.
No, well, see, that's what I mean is, these things diverge. I knew Prius Area was a neat idea.
Right.
Yes.
And, you've seen, if you know Charlie Band movies, he makes a lot of movies with little monsters.
Uh-huh.
And I had met David Allen, and I became good friends with David Allen, and I did work with him, and he got me work for Charlie Band. Now, I always got paid for all my Charlie Band work. I did storyboards on a lot of his movies.
Yeah.
I was going to say before about New Line, remind me if you want to get back to that.
No, go ahead. Go ahead and finish the New Line, and then we'll go to Charlie Band. How about that? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. It was just so funny that you got there. Yeah.
But yeah, no, New Line was, they were making a ton of movies. So there was the Nightmare on Elm Street movies and The Hidden, and God, what else?
Well, it is the house that Freddie built. Yeah.
What?
I said it is the house, literally, that Freddie built.
Yeah, and Nightmare 3 was make or break because Nightmare on Elm Street was a successful movie.
Uh-huh.
So they made the sequel, and I guess the sequel was bad and nobody liked it, and it almost tanked the whole thing. So Nightmare 3 had to be good, or else the Freddy franchise was over.
Right.
So they put quite a bit of effort into that. And and then Chuck went on to do The Blob. I did the part for him, and The Mask with Jim Carrey.
Yeah.
So and then so meeting him and Frank Darabont turned into a whole bunch of movies with both of them separately.
Yeah.
But then you always need work. So here's Charlie Band, and I did one other thing. I did a movie called Book of Love. And it was actually a book by William Kotzwinkle called Jack in the Box. That was the book. And it was the funniest goddamn script I ever read. It was so funny. I was dying. I was laughing my ass off. I was just roaring reading the script. And our son was a baby, and my wife's like, be quiet. You're going to wake him up. And I go, I can't help it. This is so funny. And then they made the movie, and they changed it from Jack in the Box to Book of Love. And
is this the one Bob Shea did? Yeah, I was about to say that's the one Bob Shea directed, right? I thought so.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And Bob Shea was kind of a intimidating presence at New Line.
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't smile a lot. And he wasn't a bad guy because I worked for them a whole bunch, and I didn't have any problems with him. But he was the boss,
Mm-hmm.
And so, and he wasn't a very funny man. And for him to be making this teen comedy movie was kind of like, that's weird, and the movie's not funny. And the scenes, you see these scenes that in the script, this was so funny, and I'm looking at it, and they're saying words, and they're doing everything that's in there, but it's like, why is this not funny? So I don't really understand it, but it's one of those examples of how things can change from words on the page to what's on film, and sometimes things get better, and sometimes things just don't translate.
Right. Absolutely.
And sometimes you get licks in too. Directors have different ways of working. Certain directors they want your input,
Mm-hmm.
and they will ask you, what do you think? What's a good shot right here? And other directors just want to tell you what to draw. They know exactly what they want, and they can tell you.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got to figure out pretty quick how they like to work.
Yeah.
And Chuck Russell was very specific, but he was open to suggestion. In one stupid little example, in The Mask, the Mask is running away from some cops, and they pull out their guns and they yell, "Freeze!"
Right.
And so he stops in midair. And I said, well, what if we put icicles on him, like turn him blue, freeze? And Chuck said, yeah, draw that. So they drew that, and they did that in the movie. So you get little, bits in like that, which can be fun, like, hey, that was my idea. And what Chuck liked to do was he wanted to get his storyboards drawn the way they wanted. He did not want to meet with the special effects people yet.
Mm-hmm.
He wanted to work with me up front and get everything exactly the way he wanted it on paper, and then take it to them and say, do this. This is what I want. And his reasoning was, if you go to them first, maybe they will fall back on things that they've already done or they know how to do. And he wanted to challenge them.
Yeah.
Give me this. Well, how can we do that? And then they put their heads together and they figure it out. So that's, not to digress onto that too much, but that's...
Do you mind if I ask you...
That was his way of working.
Do you mind if I ask you a question about The Mask?
No.
Especially with you being, your background being in comic books, and you loving comics as much as you do, was it weird for you to take a comic book that already has such a unique vision and artistic style and turn it into your own for a movie?
No, because I didn't really know The Mask comics.
Okay.
When I went there and he said, we're going to do The Mask, I was like, what's that? So, and Mike Richardson, who created The Mask, the Dark Horse guy, I had a lot of books published by him and worked with him a bunch over the years. And, he was always real tickled by the fact that I storyboarded The Mask. That was his baby,
Okay.
But, could go all over the place. But to get to Charlie Band, I knew David Allen. David Allen got me working on Robot Jocks or one of those things.
Yeah.
Well, that's directed by Stuart Gordon. I'm pretty sure Stuart Gordon directed Robo Jocks. I need to. One of these days, I'd like to meet, because Stuart Gordon has worked with him so much. He made so many different movies with him. That Castle Freak, Pin the Pendulum. I could just go.
And he posts an editorial column on the Full Moon website.
So I'd kind of like to ask him. Maybe he has a positive story. I don't know. I've never met him. So, but go ahead.
Well, I went to an interview for a movie for Robot Jocks. And I guess the one I did was Robot Wars or something. It was some cheesy Charlie Band movie about giant robots. But he wasn't there because he was late. Stuart was late. And I didn't... it's not like I got pissy and walked out. I waited as long as I could, but I had to be somewhere else. Mm-hmm. So I said, well, I'm sorry. I just got to go. So I went. But I had met Brian Usna in the meantime.
Right.
Brian looked through my portfolio, and Brian wanted to work with me. So I ended up, another one of those little chance connections, and I did a whole bunch of stuff with Brian over the years.
You did Bride of Reanimator, right?
Yeah.
Right.
And Necronomicon.
Yeah.
And Return of the Living Dead 3, whatever that was.
Yeah.
A bunch of stuff with Brian. And Brian's an interesting character. He's a lot of fun. We had fun together. And Brian had to fight with Charlie, and somebody, Charlie almost got killed, I think. I think he got killed. I know he didn't get killed, but I think he was threatened because of people he owed money to. And so, this, I knew when we went with Prehysteria, I knew that Charlie had his reputation, but he went crazy over the idea. And like I said a minute ago, he makes movies about dolls and Puppet Master and all that stuff. So it was right in his wheelhouse. Like Little Dinosaurs. It's like I'm surprised he didn't think of it.
Yeah.
And Jurassic Park was in the works, so it was kind of like a great time to make a dinosaur movie. And so, you know, and Prehysteria was going to be like the kids' version.
Yeah.
You know, for the little kids, you know, so because Jurassic Park was maybe too big and scary for the little kids.
Right.
And I had a great time. Charlie was a very nice guy. I know I said a lot of bad things, but he was a really nice guy to work with, and very friendly, very charming. And we went on location to shoot Prehysteria, which is not something that Full Moon did.
Yeah.
Hardly ever. And I sold him a couple other things. One was called Pet Shop. And the thing is that the movies were never very good. That's the only problem. I know what it's like to have what I think is a really good idea made into a not-so-good movie. So there's no real thrill in that. But my wife is a fantastic talent. Her name's Andrea, like I said. And she sculpted the dinosaurs in Prehysteria, and they're just gorgeous. The puppets are just fantastic.
Oh, I mean, I loved Prehysteria when I was a kid. So
What's that?
I loved Prehysteria when I was a kid. I loved those little dinosaurs.
Yeah, I know. I meet a lot of people that tell me that. It's funny when you get to be an old fart, people tell you like, "Oh, I saw that movie of yours. Yeah, I was a kid. That scared the shit out of me when I was a kid." And you're going, "Great," you know.
Yeah, I hope you know how hard it is for me not to be that guy.
He has been really excited to talk to you about so many different things. He's trying to control it. We all been excited, but Chad has been really, really excited. Chad has been the one who's really reached out to you. Depending on who it is, when we have these people, or when we have production people, writers, directors, we usually reach out to the ones that we're the biggest fans of. And Chad's just been so excited to have this conversation.
Yes.
Well, no, that's nice.
That was our first part with Peter von Sholly. We're actually going to cut this into 2 different episodes. Tune back.
Because he had so many amazing stories.
Amazing stories. The Sam Raimi, John Landis stories in the second episode.
And we're going to talk to him a lot about his artwork that he's still doing and the books that he has coming out that you can actually still check out.
So tune in to the second part of our Peter von Sholly episode. Thank you so much.
Kisses. You didn't do a kiss, James. Kiss, James!
I don't kiss and tell.
Tell him to lean over.
Two, three.
Welcome to Bonehead. We didn't even say it right.
I was gonna be a jerk and go, welcome to Bonehead.
You don't need to try to be.
Somebody's been reading the LSD comics.
The promo starts now.
That's probably a better promo than the one we did earlier.